Day 6 of the Sinkfield Cup is kicking off later today, but in the meantime I'm taking a look back at Alireza Firouzja's dominant performance in the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz. Now this is the double header that he did on Shak Mamedyarov. I'm going to start with his black game and then move into his white game. So let's have a look at these crushing victories, so instructive. Alireza has black in this one, and after d4 from Shak, he goes knight to f6 here. So c4 played, e6, inviting the mainline Nimzo Indian, but Shak goes knight to f3. We so often see this from the top players. d5 takes us back into the Queen's Gambit declined, and now knight to c3 played, bishop b4, and this is the so-called Ragozin defense. Shak now goes bishop to g5, many different moves as you can imagine, and after pawn h6, now we had a chops on f6 here. If you drop off with the bishop, well, it just gets crazy complicated, not necessarily so good for white, but you know, things like g5, knight e4, c5, queen a5, all this craziness can start happening on the dark squares. So Shak just chops off, queen recaptures, he's given the bishop pair, but in compensation, he gets free and easy development now after pawn to e3, and he does have a better claim in the center here, plus sometimes this queen is a bit misplaced on f6. So e3 now came, and Alireza now plays a very offbeat move. So the main move here is castles. Very logical idea. You come away from any queen a4 check stuff, you castle the king, you carry on your development. What Alireza does here is take on c4. Now it's a dubious move because you're moving a piece, a pawn twice in the opening here. You always have to be careful with that. You're not developing a piece. You're letting white develop in just one tempo with that bishop. Why is Alireza doing this? Well, I guess he's mixing it up, stepping away from opening theory, and maybe this was a particular pawn structure he was looking for here. You know, he didn't want to allow white to capture, then pawn recaptures on d5, possibly. Anyway, it's blitz, so you have more license to play in different ways. c5 now played. He strikes at the center. Shak castles the king. Now Alireza takes. And now here Shak correctly senses that he doesn't immediately have to retake that pawn. Instead, he makes a knight hop here, trying to take advantage of the fact that the king's still in the center, the queen's a bit misplaced. So he jumps into e4, immediately attacking that queen. Alireza comes to f5, and now Shak goes for a tactical line. So he'd love to land a knight on d6 now, fork the queen and king, but the bishop is currently covering that square. So Shak checks from here, knight blocks, this is forced in order to protect the bishop, and now Shak takes the bishop on b4, all about gaining access to the d6 square for his own knight. And now Alireza takes here on e4. If you recapture this one, well, this is the follow-up as mentioned. You could have something like this, and it is still playable for black, different position, but white's doing fine as well. So instead of this, Alireza takes on e4, so typical of his style, wanting to keep queens on the board. Now we had bishop to b5, and so this pins the knight, which was threatening to take the queen. And you've also now opened up this queen to laterally look at its counterpart. So Alireza can't start trying to win another pawn, for example. Not that that would necessarily be a good idea when you're still not even castled. So bishop d7 played, breaks that pin. That's why Shak now swaps. The bishop recaptures, he takes on d4, recoups his pawn, and Alireza drops the queen back to g6 here. Great move because keeps the pressure on the king side here, and we can see things are just a bit uncomfortable right now. This is a better minor piece as things stand, and Shak immediately goes wrong in this position here. So he's got this pressure coming in. There's an immediate threat to take that knight using the pin of the pawn, and the best way to parry this is with queen to f4. So you're prepared to recapture the knight with the queen, of course, if bishop takes. And also after castles, you can then go for this queen g3 defensive maneuver. If the queens come off the board, fine, you're happy. If Alireza tries to duck it again, well then at least your knight's got access now to some of these dark squares. You can start hassling the bishop. White should be doing fine there. But Shak does this in a slightly different move order. So he plays the knight to the edge, hits the queen, it comes to g5, and now he goes queen to f4. But after Alireza chops, pawn recaptures. This is just an inferior version of the previous position, because this knight can't now come back into the game without getting chopped and leaving white with these horrible tripled pawns. So Alireza goes rook d8, he's first to that open d file, and now the best move for white is actually the immediate f5 to get rid of that bad pawn. Now king e7 is best, you don't want to be capturing and letting the knight in. Now say rook fe1, king f6, you could have a line like this, and at least here white's got some kind of target to aim at, you've compromised the black pawn structure. But black remains better here, no two ways about it. But Shak challenged the open d file, very logical move, the hand just finds such a move in blitz of course. King e7 now played, connects those rooks, and now g3 from Shak, so he's got a completely different idea to f5. He wants to reactivate the knight by coming into g2 and then maybe e3 or f4 if ever permitted, and you know, you get rid of this pawn. So g5 played by Alireza, he kicks that knight, nibbles at the pawn center. Now this knight dropped back, preparing to recapture on f4 if Alireza took, but of course he doesn't. He plays the excellent bishop to f3, and this now forces the rook to give up the d file here. So it captures here, rook recaptures. Now Shak takes the pawn, this one recaptures, and he's doing this because he wants to activate his knight but not have this mangled pawn structure on the f-file. So first now he goes h4, another good move because he doesn't want to let Alireza go g4 with that pawn and then suddenly clamp on all three of these pawns just using one pawn. So Alireza takes, the knight recaptures, he drops back this bishop, and once again the knight comes back. It's completely dead out on the rim, so it's looking to reactivate into the game, but now rook d2. This is the massive problem for Shak. How do you actually unravel the pieces? What do you do about your queenside pawns? So he goes b3 to protect, Alireza goes b5. Again, a very thematic idea, looking to cramp on those two pawns. So b4 now played. Yes, took two tempos, but you waited for black to commit this pawn to the dark square. King d6 from Alireza and pawn a3. Bolsters this one. Shak's got very few moves, so he's just kind of waiting now to see how Alireza improves. So rook d3 played, pressures this pawn, knight e3. Now pawn f5, and Shak starts to bring his king over into the centre of the board. Rook b3 from Alireza. He's got time to wait here. He doesn't have to rush it. Sometimes as well, he's now clearing this square for the bishop. Rook d1 check played. King e5, the rook came back to e1 here, setting up some discoveries, and so the bishop now blocked that file, and you don't want to start going pawn to f3. My engine actually stopped working at this point. If nothing else, I'm sure you can just check, king moves, and then you can start bringing in the king, and you're pressuring this knight. You've opened up the second rank, horrible, but possibly you can even capture this pawn and there won't be dangerous discoveries. Not completely sure on that one, but not a good move to go pawn to f3. So rook a1 played, now we had pawn f4. This one was captured, king takes back, and now Shak goes a4, desperately seeking activity. If he just sits there too passively, well, the king's coming to f3, rook to b2, this kind of thing. The bishop's, of course, menacing around the king, so it's very hard to actually hold on to this f-pawn here. So by playing this move, if Alireza captures, well, he can always come up like this, I think. Yeah, you're not getting mated. And if you don't capture, if you go like this, as Alireza did, well, now takes, pawn takes back, and at least you can activate this rook. Look at this weakness here, try and start generating some counterplay. So king f3 from Alireza, he prepares to pick up this pawn. You can't actually take here immediately, or then we actually checkmate like this. That's the problem here. So now we had the king coming to e1, check happened anyway, king d2, check from here, and now the king slides away and Alireza picks up this f-pawn. So the knight is attacked, it drops back to d1, rook c2 check played, king b3, and now amazingly there's an awesome defensive resource for Shak here. So the best move for Alireza here was actually rook to c6, just challenging this one. If captures, bishop takes back, and you've still very much got winning chances in this endgame. But what Alireza did here was go rook to d2. He hits this knight, but he allows it to hop to c3, hitting the bishop, and after it moves, now Shak had a brilliant drawing opportunity. He could have taken this pawn on b5, because after bishop recaptures, you then take here, and this should be a theoretical draw, because at some point black should win this pawn, but then with rook and bishop against rook should be a technical draw. But Shak missed to play that one. After bishop to d3, he went king a3 instead, and now this move is just killing, bishop to c4, because you hold this pawn from the rook, you still hold this one, and here's the really sneaky tactic. After rook b6 attacking the pawn, rook c2 attacking the knight, now you can't even win the pawn, because this is just a devastating checkmate on the a file. So after this position here, rook to c2, Shak either resigned or lost on time, I'm not sure which. Really nice game from Alireza. Let's have a look at the one they played where Alireza had white. So he kicks off with the English attack. Shak goes pawn to e5, a reverse Sicilian. Now we had g3, knight to f6, bishop g2, fianchettos that bishop, and now Shak goes pawn c6 here. The main move is this classic d5 break, or d4 if you reverse the colours, and after takes, knight c3, knight b6, there's a whole bunch of theory goes from here. But Shak decides to go pawn c6. He wants to give the option of recapturing in the centre with the pawn, and Alireza now fights back. He goes d4. Now Shak doesn't take, but if you do this one, the queen can come in. Many games from this position, normally you don't bring the queen out so early, but because the knight can't hop to c6 in this variation, pick up a tempo on the queen, well, it's not too bad for white, advantage to white there. e4 was played though by Shak instead. Alireza now goes a3, so you can start with knight c3, but he wants to stop the bishop b4 pin. Now we had d5, and now knight c3 played, pressuring these pawns. So bishop e7 now from Shak, and here we see Alireza develop this bishop outside the pawn chain. Now you could already start with pawn to f3 here. This is one of the key breaks in the position for white. Black has this nice centre, they've got the cramping pawn on e4 especially, and so at some point you want to start undermining that, try and get your pieces developed here, but Alireza just holds off on that one for the moment. He first goes bishop g5, Shak continues developing, and now he goes queen to b3. And all of Alireza's play is connected here with pressuring this centre, trying to break down those light squares. So Shak castles the king. Now we had pawn to e3, pawn h6 challenged the bishop, Alireza gives up on it, knight recaptures, and now he takes here on d5. So the pawn recaptures, now he develops his knight, and this is a really instructive moment here. So white's got this plan to go knight to f4, pressure this d5 pawn, attack it with 3 pieces, and you don't really want to let the knight land on that square. So Shak goes bishop d6, but the other two moves that the computer suggests in that position were pawn g5 or b6, preparing bishop to b7 to defend the pawn. So when you're analysing with a computer, it's always worth thinking about what the actual plans are for each side, and it helps to unravel the suggestions that the computer is making. So bishop d6 played, Alireza just castles now, doesn't bring the knight. And by the way, you can't win that pawn. Then there was the bishop b4 check stuff, picking up the undefended queen at the end of the line, very classic tactic. And here Shak, he plays a bit tentatively really. So black's got the centre here, yes, but Alireza's going to try and undermine it with the pawn coming to f3, trying to gang up on this one at the right moment. And so the play for black should really be centred around attacking the white king. So you can start with bishop e6 here, give this pawn, and then go pawn h5. Now if white tries to stop that one with h4, well then you carry on with the rook coming here. You can give a second pawn if white wants it. You hop in the knight, say b4 to stop the rook invading, and now g5. These are the thematic ideas for black to attack. So I just want to give you a flavour of the attacking ideas, and say after h5 you don't go h4, you go say queen a6, we see this in the game. Well, now you can carry on, say the rook comes to the c file, takes, and again black just has a number of attacking ideas here around these light squares, the pieces coming in, so black really needs to jettison material, generate an attack. Now Shak has all of these ideas in mind, but he executes them in the wrong order here. So he starts with bishop to b8, Alireza now goes f3, this is one of his thematic breaks. We have captures on f3, the bishop recaptures, and now he defends this pawn. There's a ton of pressure on it, and he gives the b7 pawn, just as we saw earlier. The rook is attacked, and so the bishop bounces back to d6 to allow the queen, to defend the rook. But this is the point, he's lost 2 tempos now with this one, so just not the most accurate play from Shak. So queen a6 from Alireza, he anticipates rook to b8, that one slides across. Now pawn b4, defends that b pawn, and bishop h3 now played from Shak. So he's desperate to generate this attack against the white king. Alireza slides up with the rook, and here Shak goes wrong. So he plays knight g4, playing on the light squares, looks so logical, but probably rook e8 was his best shot here. Now the top engine move is to capture this second pawn. You could have a line like this, and at least black now picks up a pawn on e3. Game is still balanced. I mean, I know white can take here, but okay, there's different kind of attacking ideas going on for black as well. You don't have to take on d5 though, so after rook e8, you could drop back with the queen, just cover this pawn. Now there's still a bunch of pressure here, so this bishop would need to drop back. Now say bishop g2, rook c8. So I suspect that this is why Shak didn't go for this whole variation, because now white's simply a pawn up. I mean, the computer gives it roughly level because it's a backward pawn, it can be targeted, black's got the bishops. But okay, I can understand why Shak didn't go for this whole rook e8 line. So he goes knight g4 instead. He picks up this light squared bishop, looks great from that perspective. But the problem is Alireza now takes on d5, just as we saw, and there's no picking up of the e3 pawn in this line. So Alireza's now 2 pawns ahead, and they're massive central pawns, as we can see. So the rook now slides to e8. By the way, if you go for this tactic of bishop takes on g3, well, Alireza's got this nice in-between move, or Zwischenzug as they say, knight f6 check, pawn recaptures, then you pick up this bishop, and this is obviously a mess. Huge attacking threats here for white, much better position. So Shak goes rook e8. Now this knight came to c3, so it bolsters its brother. This one still defends the pawn, and Shak now pushes h5. So right ideas from Shak, just wrong execution with the move orders in this game. e4 now played by Alireza. Pawn h4, but now e5. Alireza's just steamrolling through the centre. Shak's not in time. He takes on g3. Alireza recaptures. This bishop now drops back to f8, and now queen to d3. Tucks back. Everything's safe and secure. And it also looks down here towards the king now. So for example, say you tuck the bishop back, threatened this piece twice. Well, then the rook can slide across, threaten mate. If g6, you give this square. This is horrendous. You'd have to actually give the queen here or you're getting mated. So huge attacking ideas in the position. Here Shak tried queen to g5 instead. Very attacking idea, looking at the g3 pawn, but it's too little too late. Alireza goes knight to e4. Here comes the cavalry. Look at these knights around the king. The queen drops, and now can you guess the final move that Alireza played in this position? So do pause if you want to look for it. Here Alireza played knight e to f6 with check. Beautiful, crushing move, ended the game on the spot because here Shak resigned. So why did he resign? Well, if you come to the H file here, then we can simply slide across like this, and obviously you're having to give up a queen or all sorts of material. I think that's just leading to mate, in fact. And if you take this, instead of sliding across, if you take this one, well, then we can take the queen with check. Pawn recaptures, the other knight takes with check, and the problem is this loose bishop at the end of the line, and white emerges 3 pawns up, still all of the pressure, 2 connected passes, game's completely dead. So not a premature resignation. I hope you enjoyed this video. Do hit that like button if you did to let me know. Leave me a comment if there's any games you want to see from Alireza in this Rapid and Blitz section, and do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. Never miss a future video. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.